Chapter 1. The Kidnap. The Butterfield stage driver whipped up the team as it approached the next bend, an upturn in the trail. The crack of the bullwhip and the hee-ah of the driver were hardly heard over the roar of the stage wheels. Hot dust billowed over driver and guard. Inside, rocking with the bounce of the stage's springs, were three trail-weary travelers. On the back bench, facing forward, was a tall, stout, gray-haired man. The cut of his gray suit and his neat appearance added to the air of distinction he exuded. With his neatly trimmed gray mustache, he looked like a senator. In fact, he was a senator. Senator Joshua P. Ballard from Missouri. Next to him sat his young blonde-haired daughter Sally, who was trying to not show her discomfort with the rollicking ride. The senator, sensing her discomfort, said, "Just hold on a while longer, dear. We should be in Denver soon, and you can relax with a nice soft bed." "A bath would work nicely too," she added. Then, to the man sitting opposite, "How much longer do you think it will be, Mr. Blaine?" The young man smiled from beneath his black, flat-crowned hat and adjusted the lapels of his brown suit coat. "I'd like to encourage you, miss, but it will be a while longer. It's about 2 miles to Vinegar Wells, where we'll lay over a while before pushing on to Denver." Dan Blaine was a government agent assigned to accompany and protect the senator and his daughter. Before he could add more, the stage jerked to a sudden stop, the steep incline forcing the senator and Sally into a backward reclining position. "What?" Blaine muttered. Pushing the door open and trying to lean out, he shouted to the driver, "What's the problem?" "Tree across the trail." He spatted tobacco juice to the ground in disgust. "Ethan will clear it and we'll be on our way." The guard was already climbing from the box when the shot rang out. The guard, already swinging down from the box, felt the hot sear of a Sharp's rifle bullet tear into his chest. He stiffened and fell heavily to the ground. The led horses reared and thrashed, their shrill whinnies a ghastly screech. The driver fought to control them, and the coach rocked back and forth on the steep incline. Dan Blaine practically fell from the stage as he pushed himself through the doorway. He landed on his shoulder, simultaneously grabbing his pistol from beneath his coat. Another shot rang out, and the driver pitched sideways from the box, landing in the stone-covered road, a dark black-red hole gaping between his eyes. A stocky, black-bearded man astride a bay horse was pulling at the lead horse's reins, preventing the stage from rolling further back. Another man loomed before Blaine's eyes. His mount reared as the man's pistol flamed. Blaine barely heard the blast as a bullet caught him midsection. He rolled in the dirt, bringing his 6-gun up and firing with one last breath. The outlaw whirled his mount, careening from Dan's bullet as it caught him in his left arm. Bringing the horse back around, the outlaw could see Blaine's bent body folded into a fetal position, blood pooling beneath him. With a guttural oath, the bandit fired twice more into the body of Dan Blaine and grinned. "Take that, you dirty polecat!" Screams came from inside the coach. The senator tried to restrain the hysterical Sally, but the precarious position of the incline restricted them both. He held her tight as the door was pulled wide open. A tall, swarthy man filled the open space. His pistol loomed before him, the menacing black bore threatening. "Good afternoon, Senator," the man chided, a smirking, twisted grin on his narrow face. The menacing eyes mocking, "You are now my guest." Chapter 2. Perilous Venture. The wind whipped at Jack Clayton's body, and he swung from side to side, clutching the cold, slippery rope as he groped for footing on the side of the cliff. The rain pelted his face, and rivulets of water poured into his eyes, adding to the poor visibility of the night. There should have been a full moon, but the storm clouds had covered the sky this night. It made better cover as he tried to scale the rock wall, but every step, every inch of his climb was precarious and more difficult. calling on all his strength and strong-willed determination to make it to the top of the canyon wall. Minute after agonizing minute, he inched his way up the wall until he reached the precipice where he had looped his lasso around an outcropping of rock. As he pulled himself to the outcropping, he found a narrow ledge that he could roll onto. He rolled to his back, breathing heavily, relaxing and trying to regain his strength. The rain pounded his face. He closed his eyes as let the torrent pour over him. When he had caught his wind, he opened his eyes, squinting though the pounding rain and wind. He could see the top of the rim now, about 20 feet further up. He wouldn't use the rope again. From here on, he would climb, finding footholds and handholds where he could. He was close now. Don't rush it. One slip, one misstep, and he could give himself away, or worse, tumble back to the canyon floor. Slowly, he stood up on the ledge, checked his 6-gun, secured in the holster on his right thigh, and then the pistol in the shoulder harness rig beneath his leather vest. Hatless, rain drizzled from his tousled black hair. A flash of lighting glinted across his strong face, reflecting in his steely blue eyes. With a sigh of determination, he turned to the wall, reached high overhead, and found a handhold. With a tight grip, his body stretched, his right booted foot sought a foothold. Only after careful search and fixing his foot firmly in place did he attempt to pull himself higher. Slowly, methodically, he repeated the procedure, inching skyward. When at last he reached the top, he gave one huge lunge, pushing himself over the edge and rolling onto the turf. Lightning flashed, and for a fleeting moment he could see a building of some sort. With a sudden roll to the left, he found himself crawling behind a large rock and some scrub brush. Raising himself on his elbows, he waited for the next flash of lightning. Thunder rolled. Darkness remained. Then another flash, followed by more thunder. In that instant, he made out the shape of a barn, some 50 yards away to his right. Another flash, and he saw a rough-hewn house across the way from the barn. Darkness again. He peered intently toward where the house stood. After moments, he could finally make out the wink of a faint light which must have shone through a window, difficult to see in the storm. Again and again he waited for the flashes, each time taking in more of his surrounding, mapping the entire area in his head. He would need to know where he was at all times, even in the pitch black of night. Finally, it was time to make his move. Quickly, he darted toward where he had seen the barn standing. A flash of lightning sent him diving to the wet ground, hoping to find cover. A second, then two. The thunder rolled. He pushed himself upward and continued through the darkness. Repeatedly, he continued forward until he found himself sitting with his back against the rear wall of the barn. He rested, listening intently for sounds. Eventually, he could tune out the drum of the rain and the rolling of thunder until he thought he could hear sounds of movement. Livestock, no doubt. Could he discern the murmur of voices? No, he could not be sure. Stealthily, he crept around the corner of the barn, found the front door, and lifted the bar holding it shut. The door creaked open on rusty hinges. He slid through and pulled the door shut behind him. A leather strap looped for fastening over a nail held the door shut from the inside. He stood stock still for several moments, absorbing the darkness, the sounds of livestock, and enjoying the respite from wind and rain. From a small tin box, he withdrew a match, struck it into flame, and held it high. The light revealed 4 stalls, a horse in each of them. Saddles and riding gear lay strewn on the straw-covered floor where they had been stripped from the horses. Moving closer to the stalls, he could see that they had not been cared for and had been put away wet. The match went out. Darkness. Another match flared. He found a lantern hanging from a hook on an upright supporting beam. The matchlight died, but the next match lasted until he had lit the lantern and adjusted the wick. On closer inspection, he could see the straw had been trampled and there was a well-used path to a tack room doorway at the back of the barn. Drawing his 6-gun, he held the lantern high, looking for the latch. Carefully, he released it. His body tensed, ready for what may lay in waiting for him beyond the door. With a tremendous pull, he flung the door outward, half crouching to a gunman's stance, his pistol cocked and ready to fire. He held himself in check as he stared at the scene before him. He was staring into the wild eyes of a gray-haired man and a young girl, each one on adjacent walls of the tack room, tied with arms spread eagled above their heads, with ropes dangling from the rafters. Muffled sounds of terror came through the dirty rag cloths that were tied tightly in their mouths as gags. Quickly, Jack sheathed his gun and set the lantern on the floor, drew his knife from a scabbard in his boot, and slashed through the rags. "Keep quiet. I'm here to get you out." He slashed at the bonds holding the girl's wrist and caught her beneath her arms as she collapsed into his strong hands. Gently, he lowered her to the floor and propped her against the wall. Then, turning to the senator, he did the same. Kneeling on the floor in front of them, he waited for them to compose themselves and refresh their lungs. "Take it easy. I'll be right back." He whirled, taking the lantern with him, and soon returned with a canteen that had been left with one of the saddles. Holding it to the girl's lips, he said, "Just a sip. Take it slow." She coughed, and her face contorted with the surprise of the liquid. Jack sniffed at the open mouth of the canteen. "Whiskey. Sorry, miss. I should have known these men wouldn't drink water. Try another sip. It may help you just the same." This time she gulped it. Then a second gulp. "That's enough," Jack said, then offered it to the senator. He drank greedily, then lowered the canteen and passed it back to Jack. "Thanks, son. Who are you and how did you find us?" "I'm Jack Clayton. I was sent to get you." "Did you bring the ransom money?" "No, I'm taking you out of here." "Alone?" the senator queried incredulously. "These men are killers. I've counted 6 of them. I don't know how many more there might be." "6? There's only 4 horses here." "The others must be guarding the bridge across the canyon. Didn't you see them?" "I didn't come across the bridge. I came from the other end of the canyon." The senator's gray brow arched. "How? You couldn't—" "Never mind now." Then to the girl, "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" He glanced toward the senator. He shook his head. The girl answered, "No, but they would have. How can we thank you?" "Never mind. We're not out of here yet, and if we are going to, we'd better get to it. This storm is good cover, but it will be difficult to find our way out. Those hombres inside the house probably didn't want to come out in the storm to check on you, but they will when the storm clears. When they find the barn door unlocked from the outside, they'll be on guard. Senator, if you are up to it, can you stand guard at the door and watch for them while I get the horses ready?" "Just help me to my feet, son." With the lantern lighting the way, they left the tack room. The senator leaned against the barn door and peered through a crack into the darkness outside. "Looks like the storm is starting to subside. We'd better hurry, Jack." Sally was resting on a bale of hay while Jack hurriedly tended to the horses, rubbing them down, feeding them a few handfuls of grain, and then attending to saddles and bridles. Both hands were full of saddle as he was about to throw it on the third horse when it happened. The door burst open, a blast of wind surging through the gaping opening. The senator fell backward to the floor, flat on his back. A flash of flame and deafening roar of a 6-gun filled the gloom. A lead slug thudded into the saddle in Jack's grip. The force was somewhat muted, but it did force Jack to stumble a step backward. With a tremendous shove, he threw the saddle at his assailant, at the same time drawing his gun and firing point blank at his adversary. The saddle stuck the man midsection. Jack's bullet tore into his chest and flung his body backward onto the straw-covered floor. 2 more men had rushed in behind him, but Jack's repeated triggering of his weapon cut them down, their own shots going wild as they were struck down. A 3rd man stood in the open doorway, hands raised and pleading. Don't shoot. Please, for God's sake." Jack eased out of his crouch to a standing position. He could see the man's left arm was bandaged. "All right, no sudden moves. Throw your gun on the floor and come forward so I can see you." The man did as told and moved into the lantern light. "Well, well," Jack chided. "Trigger Murphy. So we meet again. I thought I left you dead at the bottom of Dead Man's Gulch." Murphy glared from beneath his dirty black beard. "If I had known it was you, Jack, I wouldn't have given up this easy. It ain't over. You'll never get out of here alive. The boys will stop you at the bridge. If I don't, you won't either." Jack glanced at the doorway. He could see the rain was settling down to a mist, and the grayness of dawn was approaching. "How many are there?" He nodded toward the cabin. Murphy shrugged. "Senator," Jack called, "you and your daughter get those slickers and hats off those men and put them on. Take their guns if you know how to use them. You may have to." The senator looked puzzled, then glanced at Sally. She was still shaking, but nodded her understanding and joined her father in making preparations. Turning to Murphy, Jack said, "You're going with us. We'll just be your three buddies here, and your pals will let us across the bridge." "Yeah, that's what you think," Trigger sneered. "Your friends better think that too, or they might just shoot you. So if you cross me out there, you'll be dead by one of their bullets or mine. Either way, you'll be dead." Jack jerked the muzzle of his gun and pointed toward the unsaddled horse. "Now finish saddling that bronc and be quick about it." "But my arm," he protested. "Too bad. Get it done," Clayton growled. Murphy's lips pursed as he grudgingly moved forward and picked up the saddle. Chapter 3. Bridge of Peril. A few minutes later, 4 slicker-clad riders emerged from the barn. The sky was beginning to brighten, and puffs of fog clung toward the ground as the riders pushed their mounts toward the bridge. Trigger took the lead with Jack to his left, and slightly behind him, his gun barrel inches from Murphy's ribs. At a steady pace, they approached the bridge. The bridge was made with planks and was about 50 feet in length. It was going to be a long, hard ride if shooting started on this side of the bridge. Clayton grimaced, but kept the horse's pace steady. A guard sat atop a large boulder to the right of the entrance to the bridge. There was another guard on the other side of the bridge, standing squarely in the middle of the trail. "Pull up here, Trigger. Make sure they know who you are." The gun barrel prodded Murphy. The riders came to a stop. Murphy hesitated. "Go on, sing out. They better believe it," Clayton ordered. "It's okay, boys. It's us. There's been a change in plans. We'll be right back. We're coming through." Jack nodded approval, and they urged their mounts forward. The man on the rock slid to his feet and walked forward, rifle held chest high. A quizzing look was on his long, narrow face. "Boss didn't say nothing about this." "Careful, Trigger," Jack breathed as they moved forward slowly. "Keep your head up so he's sure it's you. He doesn't tell everybody everything." Murphy was passing by him now. One by one they passed by, each keeping the head downward so hats and slickers would cover them. Slowly, the seconds ticked by. So far, so good. Almost there. It was working. Then suddenly, recognition glowed in the man's eyes. "What the?" He started to bring his rifle to bear. Clayton fired and drilled the guard between the eyes. Without hesitation, he fired 2 more times at the other guard before he could react. "Follow me, fast!" he shouted to his companions as he leaped from his saddle onto Murphy's mount behind him. With his arms around Murphy so he could not bolt, and using him for a shield, Jack drummed the horse's ribs with his heels and raced it forward across the bridge. The clatter of hooves across the wooden planking was drowned out by the crash of Clayton's pistol as he continued to fire. The guard, half recovering from the surprise, loosed a shot. The bullet thudded into Trigger's chest, and he slumped forward in Jack's arms. Jack fired again, and the guard flew backward from the force of his slug. Jack pushed Trigger from the saddle, sending him sprawling onto the muddy trail just past the bridge. The three riders thundered on down the trail into the morning dawn. Chapter 4. Secret Headquarters. Randolph Farms was a vast, sprawling estate just north of and out of the city limits of St. Joseph, Missouri. The finest and thoroughbred racing horses were raised here. The stately mansion was well kept and retained the French charms of its original beauty. Jack Clayton was always impressed with its imposing stature every time he came here, but always wondered as to the need for such extravagance. It wasn't his place to question it, but it did annoy him that the government would spend so much of taxpayers' dollars on this facade. For Randolph Farms was not just a horse farm. It was the secret headquarters for the region's Justice Department operations. The public would not be aware that John Randolph, horse breeder, was in fact the deputy director for the Western District. The sun was shining brightly this early May morning as Jack Clayton rode his big black stallion into the driveway of Randolph House. An aging, balding groomsman hurried up to him quickly, reaching for the reins as Jack lifted his lean body from the saddle and stepped down. "Good to see you again, Mr. Clayton. Here, let me take care of Regret for you." "Thanks, Clyde." Jack smiled, handling the reins to him. Most men would regret handling this horse, thus the name, but Clyde had raised him from a colt and always looked forward to their return. "Thank you, sir." He led the stallion away toward the stables. Jack adjusted the lapels of his black frock coat, tightened his black string tie, and stepped to the ornate door. He lifted and dropped the heavy brass knocker and stood waiting, looking down at his neatly pressed gray striped trousers. He was just removing his black flat-crowned Stetson, revealing his neatly combed, close-cropped, wavy black hair, when the door swung open. A withered, elderly black man with gray hair and dressed in an immaculate white suit stood in the doorway. His eyes brightened. "Welcome back, Mr. Jack. Mr. Randolph is expecting you." "How are you, Silas?" Jack smiled warmly. "Good to see you again. You don't look any worse for wear than last time I saw you." "No, sir, Mr. Jack. I'm just fine. You know me. I'll never get old. And you just take my advice and don't get old either. You'll live to regret it. Don't worry about me, Silas. I have only one regret, and he's in the stable being pampered right now." Silas laughed. "Come on in, sir. He's in his study as usual." Jack stepped into the spacious vestibule and glanced around at the opulence of the furnishings, the high ceilings, a winding circular staircase, and shiny marble flooring. His high-heeled boots clicked with an echo down the hallway. Just outside the door to John Randolph's office was his secretary's desk where Jack would usually stop to chat with Effie Carmody. But today, she was not there. To his surprise, Sally Ballard was seated behind the large oak desk and working on some papers. "Sally," Jack said with surprise, "what are you doing here?" "Jack, I'm so glad to see you again. I knew you were coming. I so much looked forward to it." She smiled warmly, her big blue eyes flashing beneath her blonde hair. "I'm glad to see you again. You certainly look a lot better than the last time I saw you. That was a mighty harrowing experience for you." "Thanks, I feel better too. Dad does too, but people say he's just not the same anymore. I guess I wouldn't know how he was before." Sally had not seen her father since she had been a little girl. His mother had taken off with her, and her father had no idea where they went. When the senator received word that Sally was alive and living in Colorado, he had gone there and been reunited. It was on their trip back to Denver when the kidnapping had occurred. Sally had been getting to know her father since Jack Clayton rescued them. "We owe you so much, Jack." "Nonsense. It is I who owes you." Sally looked puzzled. If I hadn't come after you, I wouldn't have had the pleasure of getting rid of Trigger Murphy." That was mighty satisfying. He grinned with a gloat. Then, Well, Sally, what are you doing at the desk? Where's Effie? Oh, I don't know. I guess she must have retired or something. Mr. Randolph just said he needed a new secretary, and I asked if he would consider me. Dad is going back to Washington soon, and I really don't want to go. I'll be living in the mansion here, and I will have plenty of time to spend with him when he's home. Just then, the large door to Randolph's office swung open. A tall man approaching middle age with slightly graying temples and thin brown hair stood in the opening. Jack, come in. Good to see you again. He thrust out his hand and shook Jack's firmly. Come in, come in. Jack followed him into the large room. Randolph moved to his chair behind a large mahogany table with his back to the floor to ceiling glass doors that led out to a patio. He gestured toward a well-upholstered chair in front of the desk. Jack nodded recognition to Senator Ballard, who sat in a chair next to it. The senator started to rise. Good to see you, Senator. Please, no need to stand. He reached out and shook the senator's hand, then sat, smoothing his jacket absently. Senator Ballard is on his way back to Washington, Jack, Randolph said. Yes, Sally told me. I'll be glad to get back in harness. This business with outlaws was most trying. I'm afraid I still haven't fully recovered. I understand, sir. Time will take care of that. Work will be good for you, but what about Sally? Oh, she doesn't want to be part of Washington. Can't say as I blame her, but I will miss her. I'm just getting to know her, you know. Yes, I know. Well, Jack, Randolph cleared his throat. We need to get down to business. We don't have much time and you'll need to leave right away. Oh, Jack's interest piqued. He leaned forward. There's trouble brewing in the Black Hills. Gold has been found, and miners are swarming in by the hundreds, invading Indian lands and stirring up trouble. We need to beef up military forces up there, and we need to supply Fort Lincoln with guns and ammunition. We're sending a large shipment from the St. Louis Arsenal by riverboat to Kansas City. There they will be loaded onto a train to the North Country. There will be armed guards aboard the riverboat, but they will be returning to St. Louis once the shipment is unloaded. I want you to go to Kansas City and supervise the transfer. A detail of cavalry from Fort Lincoln will meet you there and guard the train until the arms reach their final destination. A babysitting job, sir? Surely. I know, Jack. This is a little out of your line, but we need you to make sure this shipment gets where it's going. We can't have a shipment this size fall into the wrong hands. This size? What are we doing? Preparing for war? Yes, Jack. We may well be doing just that. But, sir, we have treaties with the Indians. They have been abiding by them. I know what you're saying, Jack, but we've got our orders. Then, handing a sheaf of paper across the table, you'll need these to accept and transfer the shipment. Now you need to be in Kansas City by morning. You'll meet a Captain McLeod from Fort Lincoln. He should have his orders and proper identification. Jack's dark brow pulled together. He sighed. All right, sir, but I wish I knew a little more about this. I understand. I wish I could tell you more. All I can say is, be very careful. Trust no one. Chapter 5. Ambush. Gar Corbin was a tall man. His broad frame was imposing, although his midsection had begun running to fat. His broad face and drooping jowls belied his age and made him look older than his mid-40s. From high on the canyon rim, he squinted across the large boulder where he had laid his rifle. Here he waited for the winding trail below to become filled with men. He turned toward the huge man next him. Tell the others to get ready. There's a dust cloud rising down the trail. They should be here soon. Corbin grinned beneath his ragged black mustache stained with tobacco juice. Right, boss. Moose Malloy arose to a half-crouch and moved toward the other men hidden in the rocks. What Moose lacked in brains, he made up for with brute strength. Corbin liked his dog like obedience, but at the same time, he held him in contempt for his stupidity. Still, Moose was very useful. That was all Corbin cared about anyways. Obedience and usefulness. Such was not the case of Shep Palmer and Bart Sprague. He glanced at their positions. Each held a rifle ready. 2 guns holstered low at their sides. They were consummate professionals. Lean and mean, cold and deadly. Fast guns with no emotions, no fear, no conscience. Just efficient killing machines. Yes, they were useful, but also dangerous. Gar Corbin would never turn his back on these men. He would never admit to himself that he feared them, but he did. He should. Malloy went from man to man, 12 in all, each ready to pour lead onto the trail below. Corbin looked back to the trail. He could see them entering the canyon. This was going to be good. He smiled to himself. Here they come. This is going to be good. Captain Rafe McLeod led his detail of 12 soldiers along the twisted trail as it wound through the canyon. The late afternoon sun was quickly diminishing behind the high western wall of the canyon. A wisp of cool air seemed to filter through as the encroaching shadows grew longer. The captain, always alert, darted green eyes back and forth, surveying the trail ahead, occasionally checking their back trail. The chink of trappings and the steady clop of horses' hooves were all that broke the stillness of the day. There was no sign of trouble anywhere, not even a hint. Still, Captain McLeod sat uneasy on his mount, a chill crawling up his spine. 20 years in the army gave him a sense or premonition. His eyes squinted as he glanced at the setting sun. It was blinding, blotting out the rim of the canyon. It would be a good place for an ambush. If anyone were on the rim, they couldn't be seen. Then it happened. All fears were realized as a barrage of gunfire filled the canyon with a deafening roar. Horses reared and fell. Troopers were torn from their saddles. And as the thunder subsided to an occasional blast, only the lonely echoes of the canyon remained as a solemn homage to the bullet-riddled bodies of dead soldiers on the canyon floor. Chapter 6. Killer Soldiers. The misty dawn found Jack Clayton riding the streets of Kansas City. He had traveled most of the night, taking time out only for a short rest shortly before riding the rest of the way into town. There was a chill in the air, and Jack was wearing a loose-hanging, fringed buckskin jacket over his usual trail-riding garb of jeans, faded gray shirt, and leather vest. He reined regret to a halt and reached into his saddlebags, removing a sheaf of paper. He checked the map of Kansas City, glanced once more at the corner street sign. Satisfied he knew where he was going, he stuffed the papers back into the leather pouches. However, he did retain 2 envelopes which his placed securely in his jacket. He would need them when he reached the levee and claimed the shipment of arms. He wound his way through the streets and soon caught a glimpse of the river. He urged the big black on. The river came into full view. A bustle of activity filled the scene. Boats docking, unloading their wares, loading new cargo, and sailing off again. Not far from the docks, Jack could also see railroad tracks paralleling the river as it bent westward. Further down the line, he could see the train depot and sidings off to the right, where rail cars were loaded for shipping and others being left behind for unloading. Jack rode on toward the river. When he reached the levee, he could see a large riverboat approaching the dock. He looked around for the shipping office and spotted it off to his left. Guiding regret forward, he rode up to the front of the office, dismounted, and tied the reins to an awning upright support post, and went inside. The burly, balding clerk turned from the wall where he had been checking the manifests. "Something I can do for you?" He eyed Clayton warily. "I'm with the federal government," Jack stated flatly as he withdrew one of the envelopes out of his pocket, claiming a shipment. A thin, nervous-looking man was sitting at a roll-top desk off to the left. He peered up through his thick lensed glasses suspiciously. The burly clerk examined the papers, strode over to the thin man's desk, and showed them to him. They conferred in whispers, both glancing toward Jack from time to time. Then they both seemed to be in agreement and nodded affirmatively to each other. The riverboat soon docked, and Jack met with the commander of the military escort detail. They verified each other's credentials, and the stevedores began unloading, and the railroad teamsters started loading a string of 3 boxcars parked on a siding. As Jack checked the manifest, he shook his head with disdain. What in the world are they thinking? He thought. This was no ordinary shipment of arms and ammunition. 500 Winchester repeating rifles, 50,000 rounds of ammunition, 200 kegs of black powder, and, he shuddered, a Gatling gun. But most imposing of all, 3 9-pounder turret cannons. A flurry of activity and sound broke Jack's thoughts, and he looked up from his manifest. Riding down the street toward him was a column of soldiers. They looked the worse for wear. Dust-covered uniforms, dirty faces and scraggly beards, hardly the best of military discipline. Their bearing and riding posture did not claim justice for the U.S. cavalry. Jack lowered the manifest to his side and strode toward the dismounting detail. Captain McLeod? He ventured as the big man stepped to the ground, turned to face him, and glowered. There was menace in those steely gray eyes. You, Clayton? He demanded. Got papers? Right here. Jack reached inside his coat and brought out the orders. He was a bit taken back by the sudden gruffness and offense of the captain. Can't be too careful, Corbin growled. Orders are not to trust anyone. That's right, Jack returned. Suppose I see your orders. Corbin half grinned with a self-satisfaction, turned, reached into his saddlebag, and returned a sheaf of papers to Jack. Jack examined the papers, glancing toward the captain and back to the papers. Then he pushed them back toward the captain. Looks in order, Jack said meekly, trying to hide the suspicion that he felt. Jack carefully looked over the detail, trying to show only a casual interest. Looks like you had a rough trip. Their uniforms were dusty, dirty, and even somewhat ragged, with sewn stitched repairs here and there where bullet holes had been when taken off the slain soldiers. Yeah, Corbin grunted. Long way from Fort Lincoln. Sun, rain, brush, and rough terrain. He eyed Jack closely, guessing what he was thinking. Tough on uniforms and equipment as well as men. I suppose so, Jack agreed. You ready to relieve the St. Louis detail? Sure, Corbin growled. We're loading these 3 cars on the siding over there, Jack indicated. Corbin looked the area over, taking in the St. Louis guards and the cargo being piled on the landing. All right, he said, let's get to it. Then to his men, get to work, men. Start loading the horses in the first boxcar, then take over the loading of the shipment so these other guys can get out of here. Jack eyed them all carefully as they set to work. Corbin, or McLeod, as Jack knew him, reported to the St. Louis commander, and the transfer of responsibility proceeded. Jack's face turned grim as he noticed a big soldier loading his horse onto the boxcar with the rest of the horses. Not only did he seem to be busting out of his tight army breeches and blouse, but he wore non-regulation boots. They were scruffed and run down at the heels, and definitely the boots of the range. Not a soldier. Huge as the man's feet were, these boots did seem to fit him. It was as if the boots were his own, and his uniform wasn't. Even more strange, his horse was large enough to fit him too, and the brand on his horse's rump was not U.S. as the other horses, but a Crown 7. A very unusual brand. What are you looking at, mister? A sharp voice broke off Jack's thoughts. He turned to face Shep Palmer, who was wearing a corporal's uniform. Jack stared grimly into the sneering face and without fluster retorted. What are you looking at, sir? Though I don't wear a uniform, I am Captain Clayton, corporal, and you will address me as sir. I understand you had no way of knowing, but you men seem to be lacking in discipline. As long as you work with me, I will expect adherence to strict military protocol. Do you understand, Corporal?" Palmer smiled threateningly. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir." There was a mocking in the menacing glint of his slitted eyes. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Corbin coming his way. Then his tone changed and his face lightened. "Didn't mean anything, sir, but I wanted to show you something I think you should know about." "All right, Corporal. What is it?" "This way, sir. It's on the other side of this car." Palmer started to lead the way around the car. Warily, Jack followed. Suspicion rising, his pulse beginning to race. The eastbound train on the next set of tracks behind the car on the siding was already starting to chug into motion. Its long line of cars beginning to crawl forward. The whistle blared and the roar of the engine was beginning to rise as Palmer stopped to turn on Jack. "Well, what is it?" Jack demanded. "This," the voice behind him growled. Jack felt the steel barrel of an army pistol pressed into the middle of his spine. "Don't move. Don't say a word. Don't even breathe," Corbin warned. Jack stiffened, half turned his neck to see Corbin out of the corner of his eye as he spoke over his right shoulder. "Go ahead, shoot. The shot will be heard, and someone will be all over you." "Maybe not. There's a lot of noise here." Jack shrugged acquiescence. "No point in taking chances, though," Corbin chuckled. The steel pressure released from Jack's spine long enough for Corbin to raise the weapon high above Jack's head and whipped it down to crack his skull. A flash of light, then darkness, as Jack crumpled into the dirt, half unconscious, saved from a split head by the cushioning of his chin-strapped Stetson. "What happened, Palmer?" Corbin demanded. "I think he was getting wise to us," Shep stated. "Probably," Corbin agreed. "I was afraid of that. I knew Clayton would be too smart." Then added, "It's just as well we get rid of him." "How? You got a knife?" He was right. "We can't risk a shot. And what about the body?" The eastbound's whistle screeched again. Corbin glanced to his left and smiled at the slowly moving cars. "We're going to send Mr. Government Man, G-Man, on a trip east. We'll throw him into a boxcar as it goes by and by. The time he can get back here, we'll be long gone. Here, help me get him over to the rail." They each grabbed Clayton under an arm and dragged him near the train. Palmer let go, raced a few steps back, chose a passing car, and slid the side door open as he followed the car back to Corbin and Clayton. With a heave in unison, two men slung Jack aboard. Jack landed with a thud onto the straw-covered floor. His ribs hurt as he rolled further into the car. Through his half-conscious haze, he could smell the stench of cattle and felt milling hooves around him. Then all went dark as the car door slid shut. Jack tried to rise, then slumped into the filthy straw as he passed into unconscious darkness, as the dying shrill of the train whistle blowing and the drum of the accelerating engine faded. Chapter 7. Rails of Death. Moments later, Jack stirred, feeling the vibration of the rolling floor beneath him. As consciousness returned, he once again became aware of the cattle milling about him. He arose to a half-sitting position, shook his head, and pushed a steer away that was pressing against him. His head throbbed, and a trickle of blood had dried on his neck where it had seeped beneath his hat. His senses were returning, remembering what had happened. He sat fully erect now, pushed several cattle away, and while hanging onto the back of one steer, he pushed himself to his feet. Dizziness waved over him, and the moving steer beneath him left him wobbly on his feet. The constant lurch and vibration of the cattle car made his stance even more precarious. He stood a few moments gathering his strength. His eyes gradually became accustomed to the dark, and he could see the moving dark shapes of the cattle. Flashes of light through slits in the car's sides and door, gave off an eerie sensation of unreality. As he gained his strength, Jack forced his way through the crowded melee of cattle toward the sliding door. By the time he reached it, he could feel the steadiness of his usual self. He knew now that he had been shipped away like a drunken sailor, shanghaied and sent out to sea. He must get out of here. The arms were being hijacked and he had let them get away. Like a rank amateur, he had been duped. They had done it easily. A baby-sitting job, Jack recalled saying, and they had taken the guns away like taking candy from a baby. He had to get back there, and soon, or the arms would be lost for sure. He leaned against the sliding door and felt it give on its rollers. With a slow, steady push, he pushed the door slightly open. Bright sunlight poured into his eyes and half blinded him for a moment. He blinked, held his eyes shut momentarily, then opened them slowly, getting used to the bright sun. He knew he could not have been unconscious that long, so it must still be morning. The sun was rising higher in the east, so he knew he must be traveling northbound. He must get this train stopped and return to the station before the arms train moved out westward. He must get to the engineer and stop this train. He would have to go up on top of the car and work his way forward until he reached the engine. This could be an impossible task. Even if he could do it without mishap, it would take time. Each second, each minute would take him further away. Even if he could succeed in returning to the depot, he would probably be too late. But he had to try. He had to do something. With a deep sigh, he pushed the door further open and leaned out through the doorway. The train had revved to full speed now, and the wind rushed past with a steady, heavy force. He would have to fight this all the way. Turning, with his back to the open door, he leaned backward into the wind and reached above the sliding door to grasp the sliding door's roller bar. The steel edges bit into his hands as he heaved himself upwards, now dangling from the rail, rushing air pelting him with a constant blast. His powerful muscles flexed, and he gritted his teeth as he pulled himself upward until his chest rose above the car roof. His feet swung in the opening of the car door like a leaf in a gale. Rushing air beat his eyelids half closed as he searched for a hand grip on the car's roof. Half lying on the roof, his left hand still grasping the sharp rail, he reached out with his right and found a hand hold on the rooftop. With a mighty shove of his aching body, he pulled hard and crawled onto the flat top of the boxcar. He half rolled backwards, caught himself, and rolled back onto his stomach and lay prostrate, heaving great gulps of air as he tried to regain his strength. The vibration of the car roof beneath him jogged him back and forth, and his knees beat against the car roof beneath him. A moment's respite was all he dared take. He needed to get to the engineer as soon as possible, and he knew not how far away he was, for he lay crossways on the car top. Carefully, he tried to change his position as he crawled clockwise to his right. Little by little, he turned himself, finding handholds wherever he could. As he came around forward, he could now see the length of the train. There was probably 20 cars between him and the locomotive. It would take too long, even if he could make the trek across all those jolting, careening cars. He sighed deeply with despair, but with determined tenacity, he pushed himself to his hands and knees, knowing he must try. The wind whipped against his face. His eyes were squinted half shut to fight off the blasting wind. The shrill whistle of the train blared in his ears above the roaring rattle of cars and drone of the engine. Then, like an echo, another whistle blared, but less shrilly. With realization, Jack glanced to the left and further down the track. On another set of tracks, running parallel with this train's tracks, he could see heading this way was a westbound train. Hope reawakened in Jack's brain. Then, with practical thought of reality, he knew his sudden anticipation of hope was not that well-founded. His first thought was that if he could transfer himself to the passing westbound train, he could return to the depot quickly and he would not have to traverse the hazardous trek to the engine room. But the reality was that to transfer to the other train would not be easy either, and could be even more dangerous. At the speed both trains were traveling, if he jumped from one to the other, even if he could make the jump, he would have to time it just right. If he were to land on the roof of a boxcar, he would probably hit so hard that not only could he be seriously hurt from the impact, he would probably roll off the car. Also, the same could happen with a flat car, and he would be bounced off like a glancing bullet. He would have to try for a gondola with its open top and side walls to enclose him. He would have to jump before the gondola was opposite him in order to land correctly as it passed by. If he missed, all could be over. Even if he timed it correctly, he would need to land in an empty or almost empty gondola. If he landed in coal or other hard cargo, it could still be disastrous. Closer and closer the oncoming train came. Its whistle blared louder, and the clamor of both engines and rattle of cars became deafening. The G-Man pushed himself precariously to his feet, legs spread and knees flexed for a lower center of gravity. The roof of the boxcar wobbled beneath his feet, and he spread his arms wide for balance. The engine of the westbound was close now, 2 trains passing, going their separate ways. Jack carefully twisted his body so he could make his jump approach diagonally across the car roof so the oncoming rush of air would be somewhat at his back, giving him extra momentum as he entered the daring leap. The engine had passed him now, the oncoming cars rolling in suit. Several boxcars passed by, then a flat or two and more cars. Here it comes, he thought, as he saw the approaching gondola. He swallowed hard. Closer, closer. Now, no. He pulled back in his stance and watched the coal-laden gondola go by. The pounding wind could hardly dry the sweat that poured down his face. More cars passed by. 2 more gondolas approached in tandem. Steady, steady, here they come, ready or not. Got to try, now. With 2 quick strides and then a jump, leaping into the air, arms extended like wings, he hurtled himself into the nothingness of whipping air. All was a blur as the machinery passed beneath him. He seemed to dangle suspended in flight, but it all came up fast. Even with the air blasting his eyelids half shut, he panicked as he saw the first gondola passing beneath him. Missed! He choked with a gasp of air, and his heart seemed to fill his throat, and then he landed. The second gondola was just passing by, and Jack fell into it, almost missing but managing to fall inside at the rear. His outward splayed arms grabbed the edge of the top of the back wall, the force seeming to pull his arms from their sockets, but he held on tight, pain shooting through his back. He had pulled his legs upward, trying to grasp the side of the wall with them, hoping that if there were any cargo, he would not be plunging into it. He hung there a moment, catching his breath. He looked down. The gondola was 1/3 filled with coal. Slowly, he lowered his feet and stood in the vibrating stones. He leaned back against the wall. He breathed heavily and rested, his perception returning to normalcy. The train was slowing by the time he regained his composure. It must be approaching the depot, he thought. He scrambled to the right side of the gondola, leaned over the edge, and peered down the track. A whistle blew, and he could see the loaded train with its hijacked cargo starting to chug forward and head on down the track. Clayton grimaced. So close, he couldn't let it get away. Not after all this. He pushed himself off the wall and struggled across the coal to the other side of the gondola. The train was crawling along now, barely moving, rolling into its stop. Jack heaved himself up and clambered over the side of the car, lowered himself body length, and dropped into the dirt alongside the track as the train came to a halt with a giant hiss of steam. The moving ground beneath his feet slipped out under him, and he landed sitting up. Without hesitation, he pushed himself to his feet and ran toward the shipping office where he had left Regret tied. Regret shied a little at the sudden advance, but recognized his master. He snorted, eager to go into action. With quick, smooth action, Jack had the loosened reins and swung into the saddle, pulling Regret's head around and urging him into pursuit. Hell was thrown to the winds, and passengers, passerbys, and workers all scrambled to escape the path of the furious flight. Freight was dropped, and women screamed, but horse and rider fled on crossing the railroad tracks and heading westward in pursuit of the train ahead, which, although it had a good head start, it had not yet built up a full head of steam. Chapter 8. Deadly Pursuit. Jack urged the big black forward. The big stallion seemed thrilled by the challenge and stretched his legs in giant strides, eating up distance. Clayton looked ahead and saw the tracks veering away from the river in order to avoid mountainous high ground. The track would bring the train back toward the river on the other side of the hills, where the trestle would lead it across the river and head on west. Jack pulled Regret around and left the track trail. The shortcut over the hill could make the difference. He had to reach the train before it crossed the trestle. He would not be able to ride across it himself. Urging Regret into the hill country, Jack let the big black pick his way carefully up the rough terrain. Regret knew what his master wanted, and Jack was never one to push his best friend beyond his limits. It was a partnership of horse and rider, and each partner respected the other. It was slow going, climbing to the top of the ridge, but reached it they did. Clayton breathed a sigh of relief as he reined the black to a halt. Down below, he could see the train approaching. They were ahead of it, but by the time they traversed down the hill, it could already be passing them by. No time to rest, only a quick breather. Clayton urged his horse down the embankment, holding the reins loose as Regret bowed his head and half slid downward. The scraping of rock and dirt sounded in his ears, and he hardly heard the report, but felt the near miss as a bullet whizzed past his ear. He bent low, heard the report of another shot. He could see gun smoke puffing outside the window of a coach. They had seen him, and they were going to stop him. He pulled his mount toward the right, letting the train pass by, so he could swing in behind and out of pistol sight. With a hearty call to the magnificent steed, the G-man rode in behind the passing caboose. Fortunately, there didn't seem to be anyone in it. Yet, but there would be. Jack needed to catch the train and climb aboard before guns would start firing from the caboose. Clayton leaned forward in the saddle, head bent low across Regret's neck. He urged him on. The great horse lengthened and quickened his stride. His gleaming, muscular flanks shimmered in the sunlight. Flecks of lathered foam were forming as he pushed forward with valiant effort. The distance between them and the rear of the caboose was shortening. Slowly, steady was the gain. The engine was now starting to cross the trestle. The whistle blew its approach warning. The train started to slow for its passage across the river. The rear of the caboose was close now. Closer, closer, then close. Jack stretched his body upward and outward as he reached out, and reaching, stretching, then finally curving his right hand around the guide rail of the car. He pulled with all his strength, left the saddle, and grasped the rail with his other hand, hanging on for dear life as he swung in the air, clambering his feet upward to try to gain a foothold on the caboose. Regret fell back and slowed his pace, heaving and gasping great gulps of air after his gallant effort had succeeded. Once, twice, Clayton's feet slipped, failing to find a perch. Then he found it. His toes dug in, and he managed to land himself firmly on the caboose outside platform. Glass splattered over his shoulder, showering him with broken shards as he ducked his head to avoid the hot lead projectile which followed the bellowing crash of a 6-gun from inside the caboose. He swung back to the left, still clutching the rail, hoping to swing out of the line of fire. Another shot blasted, then another. Quickly, he pulled himself up to crawl onto the top of the car. He had just landed flat on his stomach as a man rushed out onto the platform. Bart Sprague fired again, then again. Wood splintered and flecked Clayton's face. He rolled forward across the roof and came up against the cupola. He looked up and saw Corbin's flabby face in the window of the cupola, his pistol held high. Jack rolled just in time as glass and bullets spewed out to where he had just laid. He pushed himself aside, then sprang upward into a crouch and began to run forward. Train and trestle shivered and trembled beneath his feet. More pistol shots blew gaping holes on the rooftop where Jack's footsteps had been, missing his heels by bare minimum margins. Pulse racing, sweat beating down his neck, running as best he could, the G-Man reached the front of the caboose. Without breaking stride, he leaped forward and landed solidly on the roof of the next car. He fell, grasped for a handhold, pushed himself to his feet, and started onward and forward, the shaking boxcar beneath him. Down below, Corbin had recalled Sprague, and together, with Big Moose Malloy, they exited the caboose to enter the next car. "Come on," Corbin commanded. "We can go from car to car faster than he can. We can get ahead of him." Clayton continued forward, steadily, but slower than he would like. He could see now that the engine had finished crossing the trestle and had started up a long, arduous grade. The whistle blared again. Inside the train, Corbin, Sprague, and Malloy had found their way back to the first car of loaded arms. They were now 2 cars ahead of the G-Man. "All right, Moose," Corbin shouted. "It's up to you. Go get him." Moose's jaw dropped. "Double it. What?" he stammered. "Go get him," Corbin repeated. "What do you mean, go get him?" "Just like I said." Corbin was irritated. "How many times do I have to tell you? You big stupid ox." "Stoop," Moose muttered, his eyes bulging fear, anger, and hurt. "Go up on top and get him," Corbin ordered. "Why me?" He looked toward Sprague. "Why not Sprague?" he thought. "Shut up and get up there." Corbin shoved him out onto the coupling platform. Moose gritted his teeth, seething with anger. He stumbled across the coupling, drew his pistol, and started to climb up the ladder to the top of the car. He laid his right hand and weapon on the roof as he pulled himself upward until he was chest high above the rim. There before him, still edging forward, he saw Clayton in the middle of the car. With blind instinct, he fired point blank, not taking time to aim. Clayton threw himself face down on the roof. Hot lead flew through the open space where he had stood. He half rolled to the side as Moose climbed the rest of the way to the top of the car. Wood splintered close to Clayton's hands as the big outlaw's gun thundered again while Jack pushed himself upward in a dive, head down into Moose's midsection. Malloy's pistol fired wildly into the air, partly from Jack's lunge, but mostly from the sudden blast behind the train as the trestle was blown apart by heavy explosives. Pieces of timber and debris rained down on both men as they fell to the roof of the car beneath them, both men stunned by the sudden explosion and force of the blast. The last car of the train has just cleared the trestle when the blast came, timed perfectly to leave pursuit stifled. The debris was still pummeling the train, and the roar of the blast still resounded in the fighting men's ears, but both continued to struggle with one another. They were both rolling on the flat top of the car, Malloy's arm outstretched skyward clutching his weapon as Clayton gripped his wrist and forearm, trying to wrestle it away from Moose. Moose was powerful, and Jack strained desperately to hold the weapon back. But Moose was prevailing, and gradually, slowly, he was bringing the gun back down into a deadly position. As the 2 men wrestled for control, the pitch of the car started to slant as the train progressed up the higher ground. Jack and Moose, locked in struggle, could feel themselves starting to slide toward the rear of the car. Malloy's eyes bulged in terror. There was more than just this G-Man to contend with. He had been stunned by the blast. Corbin, the dirty lout, had never told him about dynamiting the trestle. If he didn't have this government man taking all of his attention, dim-witted as he was, He might have reasoned why Shep Palmer had stayed behind with a horse. With the trestle gone, it would be a while before they could be pursued. Clayton felt his grip on Malloy's arm weakening. Then, with a sudden relaxation, he let the momentum of Moose's strained muscle bring the gun down. Jack rolled a little to the side and slammed the big man's wrist to the roof boards. Moose yelped with pain and surprise as the impact loosened his grip and the pistol slipped from his fingers. The gun slid down the slanted car, as did both struggling men. Jack was on top of Moose now. Moose's arm stretched out, reaching, fumbling for the gun. Clayton fought to hold his arm back while searching to gain control of the weapon. Moose almost got his fingers around the sliding barrel, but it slipped away as both men slid to an abrupt halt, caught by the upper rail and rear ladder of the car. They rolled onto their sides, and Jack's fist came up squarely and flattened Malloy's nose. He fell backward. Jack dived on top of him. Moose doubled his right leg and caught Jack midsection. Clayton fell back, brought up again by the ladder. Malloy started to push himself up and attack when sudden realization flooded over him. Movement of the inclined car had changed. The car was now rolling backward. Gripping the floor where he sat, he threw Clayton a quizzical glance, fear and rage flying renewed. Betrayal! Moose may not have been that smart, but he quickly grasped what had happened. First, Corbin had sent him up here to maybe die. And now he had uncoupled the cars. This car, the cars behind it, and the caboose would all rush down the steep incline to fall over the torn trestle and plunge into the river water far below. Maybe die fighting Clayton? He grimaced. No, he would surely die with Clayton. Corbin, damn him all to hell. The caboose was already pitching over the edge of the blown trestle. The weight pulled the other two cars faster. Malloy leaped to his feet. He had to jump even if there were no chance. Jack came up as fast, dove onto Malloy's standing frame. With all the force he could muster, he pushed upward and outward. The two men, in tandem, fell into the rushing open air as their feet left the train. They seemed to dangle in midair as the last boxcar plunged over the edge. Jack and Moose hit the water together, the splash of their bodies obliterated by the tremendous tidal wave like splash of the plunging cars. The water rose and whirled, churned rapidly, and pelted the two men. Their grips on each other broke and tore the two men apart. The swirling whirlpool sucked them beneath the surface into tumultuous darkness. Lungs aching, Jack struggled under the water, trying to regain control of his body. It seemed like an eternity, but eventually he felt himself rising. With a huge gasp, he gulped air as his head finally broke out of the water. His arms flailed about as he tried to tread water. He could see the train cars piled into the river beside him as the strong current and whirling waters floated him past them. The roar of the raging waters echoed in his ears as he swirled about, unable to attain a swimming position. He had no control of his speeding passage, and the current was flowing faster and faster. The roar of the raging waters was growing louder. He did not see Malloy at first, but as he swirled around to see downstream, he could see the big man struggling several yards in front of Jack's position. Malloy's screams were masked by the roar of the current. Then, realization waved over the G-man. The increasing roar was not that of the current, but up ahead, with Malloy being sucked into it, the water spewed over a cleft into a waterfall. Jack saw himself being swept into the rocks alongside the riverbed. He splayed out his arms, trying to grasp something to hold on to. The current was too fast, and he collided solidly with a large rock outcropping. He bounced backward into the main stream. He was almost to the falls now. He almost thought he could hear Malloy's terror-filled scream as he disappeared over the edge with the torrential spill of pelting water. Clayton's heart sank, partly in grief as he watched his adversary swept away, partly in reconciliation that he would follow in that fate. Then he went over, falling, tumbling, struggling as fell. Tons of rushing water poured over him, pounding him senseless with brief moments of realization that he was being thrust helplessly into the depths of a watery grave. He swallowed water, his insides wretched in pain. He felt like he was about to explode from the inside. Then the final plunge into the waters below sucked him into the quiet silence of the deep. He started to succumb to the peacefulness of drowning, but the scraping of sharp rocks brought him back alert. He was floating near the bottom now. He got his arms out in front of him and pushed them back, grabbing handfuls of water and actually swimming upward. The bright sun of late morning burst into his burning eyes, and he squinted in pain, treading water until he could regain his senses. Slowly, the fog lifted from his brain, and his perception returned. The water was fairly calm now, with just a steady, lazy current. He looked behind him and saw the magnificent beauty of the waterfalls dumping into the river. Somehow it did not appear as menacing as it did moments ago, seen from the inside out. Clayton gazed around him. All was quiet save for the rushing sound of the waterfalls. Ahead of him, he had a clear view of the river. He swallowed, a lump of regret in his throat. Malloy was nowhere to be seen. Apparently, he had been swallowed up by the angry water. Enemy and adversary, that he was, it was too bad. He could have been useful in tracking down his cohorts. Besides, Clayton felt sorry for the big man. It was a brutal way to die. Chapter 9. Tough Lady. A week later, Jack Clayton was on his way to King City, Texas. After his foray in the river, Jack had climbed out of the river, found Regret, and rode back to Kansas City. Here, he telegraphed ahead to Bannock City to stop the train when it came through. Too late. It had already passed through and didn't stop. Jack then telegraphed ahead to Prairie Junction, but the train never arrived there. Most of the cars were found parked on a secluded spur siding, but the rest of the train was lost without a trace. Authorities were contacted, and a search was conducted to no avail. The train with its deadly cargo had vanished. Jack had returned to Randolph House much chagrined and with little to go on. Only the distinctive brand on the big man's horse, the Crown 7. Randolph had made a check of brands and found a Crown 7 registered to an Alexander Lucky King. The man was somewhat of a cattle baron and had considerable influence in southern Texas. Not only did he have a considerable spread of 225,000 acres, but he was the leading owner of mining operations in the area. The town of Dusty Flats had grown considerably over the years, and 3 years ago, the town had been named King City after its leading citizen. Newspaper search into King's background found that he was a man of honorable repute and had distinguished military service in the recent war between the states, in which he had risen to the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Union Army. His picture showed him to be a tall, powerfully built man. His thick hair grayed at the temples, and his eyes were large and alert. Other pictures showed him with the territorial governor, with other dignitaries, and often with attractive women. Most notably was a picture that revealed another man in the background. Jack recognized this man as the man posing as Captain Rafe McLeod, and who had been referred to by his associate as Corbin. Without haste, the G-man had saddled up Regret and headed out to King City. Regret jaunted along with a steady gait. Jack was lost in reverie, paying little attention to the terrain as Regret picked his way through the brush-covered countryside. Jack had deliberately stayed off the main trails on his way to King City. He brought his thoughts to a close for the time being as he squinted up at the noonday sun. He pulled his neckerchief off and wiped the sweat off his brow. Then he tied it loosely back around his neck. He had been traveling steadily, making good time, he thought. Should be in King City in another couple of hours. He would have to ride out of the rough now and follow the main trail the rest of the way into King City. The main trail ran through easy canyon, and there wasn't much passable terrain on either side to avoid it. Jack nudged Regret slightly and raised the reins loosely, guiding him up the hillside. The main trail lay on the other side. They were just nearing the top of the ridge when he pulled up sharply. The sound of gunfire broke the stillness of the day just beyond the ridge. Upon reaching the crest of the ridge, Clayton gazed at the scene on the trail below. Off to his left, an open buggy, pulled by a swift gray mare, clambered around a bend in the trail. They gray's tail streaming out behind her, galloped with frenzy, the buggy wheels slewing around the turn, churning dust into the eyes of the slight, red-haired woman, whipping the reins frantically, driving the mare recklessly onward. Behind her, a masked rider, bandana across the bottom half of his face, raced his mount after the buggy. He fired his pistol again, and the buggy slewed to the left and then back to the center of the trail. She whipped at the mare again. The rider was gaining on her now. He fired twice more. Shooting from a moving horse at a moving target was almost impossible. A hit would be luck. Jack Clayton hardly needed to urge Regret into action. Jack pulled his 6 gun as they trekked down the slope toward the trail. Without slackening speed, he threw 2 quick shots of warning at the masked man. The distance was too far to hope for a hit. The man pulled his horse up short, threw a quick shot at Clayton, then pulled his horse around and retreated, drumming his boot heels into his mount's sides, vacating the area as quickly as possible. The woman in the carriage had passed by as Jack rode into the play. She was already far down the road, sliding around a hairpin turn. She screeched with terror as the buggy half-turned sideways. She had lost her grip on the reins, and they now dragged beneath the horse that now seemed to be running away down the dusty trail. Jack holstered his pistol and let the fleeting man ride on. A word to Regret, and they galloped off down the road after carriage. Regret quickly cut the distance down, gaining steadily on the careening vehicle. Dust swirled around the G-man as his mount's shod hooves churned up the dry trail. The whirling wheels of the carriage spewed another cloud of dust behind it, enveloping Jack in its haze. Closer and closer horse and rider began to overtake the runaway buggy. Emerging from the cloud of dust to pass the carriage on the left, Clayton could hear the screaming woman and could see the look of panic in her face. She gripped both side rails of the carriage seat in a death grip, swaying back and forth almost drunkenly, totally out of control of all balance, feeling every bump and twist of the trail. Jack, on the big black stallion, pulled alongside, not slackening pace a bit. They passed the buggy, came alongside the gray mare. She was tiring, and she began to falter. As he came close, Clayton reached out, grasped the mare's bridle, and pulled back, at the same time bringing his own reins up sharply, pulling Regret into a halt. A few sliding, slowing strides, and the mare and carriage rolled to a stop. Jack leaped from the saddle and ran to the side of the carriage. "Are you all right, ma'am?" The question was automatic, but he could see that she was sobbing and distraught. She didn't answer at first. Then, catching herself and her breath, she pulled herself erect, smoothed out her gingham gown, dabbed at her eyes with a finger, wiping away the tears. "Ma'am?" Jack repeated. Yes, yes," she began to blurt. "It was awful. That man?" adding, "Why?" "Just try to relax, ma'am," Jack said with a calming, reassuring tone. "It's all over now. Everything is all right. If you like, I can drive you on into town." She nodded. "Would you? You're so very kind." "Glad to," Jack said, tipping his black Stetson. "I'll just tie my horse in the back and be right with you." The woman's sobbing seemed to subside as Jack led Regret to the rear of the carriage and tied him securely. He strode back to the carriage, placed his hands on the sides of the seat, lifted his right leg to step on the running board, and started to push himself upward, becoming a bit off balance when surprise struck. The woman's head came erect. There was no longer fear in her face. Sharp, fiery green eyes blazed out from under the red shocks of flowing, long red hair. For the first time, Jack could see the full view of her face, and would have found her extremely attractive if it weren't for the malice in her stare, the threat in her voice, and the Colt. 45 held firmly in her hand. "Hold it right there, Galahad," she warned, the large black muzzle yawning at Clayton. "Don't move a hair. Just keep that position like it is." Jack forced a wry grin. Duped again. "I suppose this was just a setup and I fell for it. Your mistake, lady. I haven't got anything worth stealing." "Shut up. Now very carefully release your left hand and slide your guns out and toss them on the seat next to me." The G-Man complied. Silently, without a word, and keeping his eyes on her, he slipped his sidearm free from his hip and let it fall onto the cushion. "The other one," she demanded sternly, letting the barrel of her pistol waver toward Clayton's left shoulder. Clayton pursed his lips in disgust, and keeping a wary eye on her, he reluctantly extracted the pistol from his shoulder harness hidden beneath his leather vest and dropped it on the cushion also. "Now, keep your hands high and step back," she ordered. Clayton released his hold on the step and stood up on both feet. "Go on, step back," she repeated. He did so. "Keep stepping back." She jerked the muzzle upward threateningly. Without a word, he did so. "All right, stop," she demanded. "Now turn around and start moving back the way you came." Jack hesitated, glancing back down the trail, then up at the sun, and then back to his captor. "You going to leave me out here on foot?" She didn't answer. She just motioned with her pistol. "Move," I said, "or I'll leave you out here on your stomach, oozing your guts out." "I believe you would," Jack chided, sighed, and turned to face the trail from which he had come from. Then he glanced at Regret tied firmly to the carriage. "So long, old pal." Jack nodded to the big black, then glared back at the woman. "Sorry, ma'am," he said calmly. "I'm afraid you're going to regret this." Then, with a sigh, the G-Man began to walk down the trail, his arms still held high. He had walked about 100 feet when he heard the crack of the buggy whip and the rolling of the wheels as the carriage continued on. He stopped, lowered his arms, and stood there watching the woman travel on. A wry grin began to form on his face as he watched and waited. "Just about now, any time now, Regret," he thought to himself. "Do your stuff." With a sudden digging in of his hooves, Regret virtually set the brakes. He began to slide on his hooves as he pulled back violently and rearing upward as far as he could, coming back down and pulling again. The mare felt the sudden drag and began to bolt. The woman lashed the buggy whip outward and stung the mare's left flank. This only added to the mare's confusion. She was already tired, and her strength was ebbing rapidly, trying to overcome the anchoring weight dragging behind. Jack chuckled to himself and strode back down the trail toward the carriage. By the time he reached the buggy, it had come to a complete stop. Regret was now sitting back on his haunches, holding the carriage in its place. Jack laughed to himself. He could imagine the amusement Regret himself was feeling. Jack strode back to the carriage. "Having problems, lady?" he taunted with amusement. She turned in her seat and glared at him, fire in her face. "I told you to get out of here," she blustered. Now, don't be hasty. I can help you. But if you don't want my help," he lifted his arms, palms up, shrugged his shoulders, twisted his mouth sideways in a half grin. "That," he said, pointing at Regret, "is the stubbornest animal I ever saw." He turned and started to walk away. "Wait a minute, come back here," she shouted, defeat in her voice. He stopped, waited a moment, turned and grinned with self-satisfaction. "I wish you'd make up your mind, lady. What is it with you anyhow? I save you from that bandit and then you turn on me. I even offered to drive you into town. I don't get it. How did I know I could trust you? What if you tried to take advantage?" "Don't flatter yourself, lady," Jack sneered. "I'd just as soon have a rattlesnake. At least they're predictable. Why you... She gritted her teeth. I should have shot you in the first place. Go ahead. Then you deal with that big overgrown jackass. Regret snorted as if he understood the insult. Look, Jack said, we're both going into town, so let me drive you in. He grinned. You can keep my guns until then. Then he added, I'll probably regret that. Then we can go our separate ways. She considered it a moment. All right, but don't try anything. I wouldn't dream of it. He started to climb aboard before she could change her mind. She slid to the right side of seat, scooped up the guns, and placed them in the lap folds of her skirt. She kept her pistol in her hand, trained on Jack. Just be careful with that thing, Jack pleaded. It can be a bumpy trail. I wouldn't want it going off accidental-like. If it goes off, it will be no accident, she warned. Jack grinned wryly and spoke over his shoulder. Okay, pal, rest time is over. Let's go. Regret whinnied, pushed himself to his feet, and shook himself all over. Jack clucked to the mare, and the carriage began to roll on. Regret lumbered on willingly. Neither driver nor passenger spoke for several minutes as the carriage rolled on down the canyon trail. Finally, Jack broke the silence. What were you doing out here, and why was that man after you? Don't ask questions, mister, she stated flatly. It's Jack, he said. Jack Clayton. He waited for her to reciprocate. She didn't. Well, Jack said, you got a name? Of course, I've got a name, she snapped. But you don't need to know. All right, Miss Mime, but you don't need to know. I must say that is a mighty unusual name. She glared at him with exasperation. They were well into the canyon by now. Look, I'm tired of this. Just shut up and drive. Nervousness trembled in her voice, and she glanced upward at the sides of the canyon. Her green eyes glanced back and forth with apprehension. Jack sensed there was something more than just her irritation with him. Okay, he conceded and fell silent, feeling the girl's increasing uneasiness. The hackles on the back of his neck began to bristle, and he felt the chill of danger. Nonchalantly, Clayton glanced furtively up the canyon walls, trying not to show he had noticed his companion's uneasiness. This would be a good place for an ambush, he thought. Had he been duped again? Was this all a setup? He would have to be ready. He snapped up the reins and urged the mare a little faster, but not fast enough to show concern. He would be glad to get through this canyon and hopefully alive. The G-Man's suspicions were well-founded. On the rims of the canyon, a man was stationed on one side and two men were stationed on the other, hidden by large boulders. They each had a rifle resting across a rock for support, and a clear view of the trail was below them. Something's wrong here, Gar Corbin growled, watching the scene unfolding as Regret held up the carriage and Clayton striding back to climb into the buggy. He muttered to Bart Sprague beside him. Then he gasped and uttered a string of obscenities. What the hell is she doing? Anger rose. She's got Clayton in the carriage with her. That's not the plan. So what? Sprague grinned. We shoot them both. Simple. Yeah, well, the boss wouldn't like that. Corbin growled. I would, Sprague chuckled. Of course he would, Corbin thought. Sprague liked killing. He glared at Sprague, tried to hide his own fear of the killer. Something went wrong. We let them pass. The boss will have to think of another way. The carriage rolled through. No action was taken by Corbin and Sprague, so Shep Palmer on the opposite rim followed suit. His orders had been to open up only when Corbin and Sprague started to fire. Besides, the carriage was to pass first, then Clayton on foot and unarmed would have been the target. Palmer knew the plan had gone awry, as the buggy passed on out of sight. Shep Palmer moved back from the rocks, mounted his horse, and set out to rendezvous with his cohorts. Jack tried not to show his relief as they emerged out of the canyon and he noticed a relaxation on the part of his companion. She lowered her pistol to the fold of her skirt and placed it with the others. Jack noticed and kept a smile to himself. Things seemed to be melting. He clucked to the mare, and they continued on down the trail to King City. Chapter 10. A Change of Plans. Gar Corbin, Bart Sprague, and Shep Palmer raced their lathered mounts into the front yard of the Crown 7, pulling them to a sudden halt, half sliding up to the hitch rail in front of the house. They jumped from their saddles and clambered onto the front porch, their heels pounding the plank flooring. The front door flew open. A tall man with black hair, graying at the temples, stared out with large, penetrating dark eyes. From the urgency of the approach, Alexander Lucky King knew something had gone wrong. "That woman of yours," Corbin accused offensively. "She crossed us up." King's anger and irritation was held under control. "Come inside. Tell me what happened." After King's gunmen had relayed what had happened in the canyon and that Jack Clayton was still alive, they waited expectantly for their chastisement, as King turned away and thought for a while. "I told you, we should have shot them both," Sprague reminded Corbin. "No, you did right," King said quietly as he turned back to his men. "She wouldn't cross me. Something went wrong. We've got to try another way." "I'll go to town and shoot him, if you want, boss," Sprague chuckled. King glared at him with irritation. This man scared him too. No, that won't be necessary. There is still nothing to tie me into this deal, as long as he doesn't see any of you boys that were in on the train job. We're going to move the schedule up. You men get the arms moving tonight. I'll keep Mr. G-Man occupied until you get it done. That way you'll be out of sight and he'll have nothing to tie me in. Who knows, I might be able to dispose of him myself." He grinned to himself with self-satisfaction. "I'd really enjoy that. I surely would." It was just after noon when Jack tooled the carriage into King City's Main Street. The street was fairly crowded with wagons and horses. Business seemed to be brisk in this growing metropolis of the range country, and Jack could hardly avoid noticing the influence of the town's leading citizen. They passed by King's Mercantile on the right, the King of Chance Saloon and Gambling Hall on the left. Further along was the King Bank, King Feed Store, King Livery. Jack conceded to the general idea. This was King City as the name implied. Jack's attention was drawn to the King Opera House. He took special notice of the bill posted. Now appearing, every Saturday night, the singing nightingale of the West, Miss Tamara Wilde. Underneath was a picture of the singer. It was a good likeness of the woman beside him. "Well, Miss Wilde," Jack said matter-of-factly, "I got you here safe and sound. See, you had nothing to fear from me." She wrinkled her nose. "Pull up here, Galahad," she ordered. "You're here. I'm here. Now we go our separate ways." "Yes, ma'am," Jack agreed. He drew the mare to a halt in the middle of the street and passed the traces over to Tamara and stepped down. He looked up at her, squinting into the bright noonday sun behind her. "If you don't mind, Miss Wilde, I'd like my guns back." "Fair enough," she answered with surprising cooperation. She handed them over. "If I was too suspicious, I'm sorry." It was sort of a forced, almost apology. A girl can't be too careful. "No, ma'am," Jack agreed, slipping his guns into their holsters. He tipped his hat, turned, strode to Regret, and untied him. Without looking back toward the girl, he turned Regret and led him back down the street toward the livery stable. Tamara Wilde drove on. It was late afternoon when Jack Clayton entered King's Palace Restaurant. After seeing to Regret's needs at the livery, Jack had registered at the only local hotel that did not bear King's name. While not as luxurious as King's Palace Hotel, it was more affordable, and Jack was always more comfortable with a simpler life. He had taken a nap and cleaned up with bath and shave. He dressed into his black broadcloth suit with white shirt, vest, and string tie. He dispensed with his holster and cartridge belt, but retained his shoulder holster tucked neatly away under his arm, concealed beneath his coat. He dusted off his flat-crowned black hat and set off to find something to eat. It was early yet for supper, and the restaurant was fairly empty, with customers just starting to come in, but Clayton was hungry, so he had come in. He had been directed to a table near the wall toward the back by an attractive young hostess, who winked coyly at him as she placed the menu before him and swished away. Jack chuckled slightly, then turned his attention to the menu. With a startled jerk of his head, Jack looked up quickly when he heard the hostess greet a newcomer through the door. "Well, hello, Mr. King, Miss Wilde. Early tonight, aren't we?" Clayton had a good vantage point from where he sat. He could see most of the spacious room and had a good view of the entrance. He watched as the big man escorted his companion to what appeared to be his own private table near a window in the front. Very cozy, he thought as he watched the couple glide across the plush carpeted floor and King pull her chair out, help her slide in, and leaning close to her neck, brushing it slightly with his cheek. Her eyelids closed, and she seemed to savor the caress and smiled faintly. King seated himself across the table from her. Tamara Wilde said something to her companion and nodded toward Jack. King looked over in Jack's direction with an appraising stare, the bending closer to Tamara. They spoke lowly, occasionally glancing toward Jack's table. Then, as if arriving at a decision, King lifted his arm and motioned the hostess back. He spoke lowly to her. The girl straightened and swished over to Jack's table. "Mr. King requests that you join him at his table," she said. Jack glanced from the girl toward King, thought a moment, glanced back at the girl. "Fine," he said agreeably. "I'd be honored." He followed her to the table. She introduced King and Tamara. She smiled at King. "Will that be all, sir?" She asked for dismissal. "Yes, thank you, May." King stood and held out his big hand. "I understand. I am deeply indebted to you, Mr. Clayton, I believe you said, dear?" Nodding toward Tamara, not actually requesting an answer. Jack acted a bit flustered on purpose. "I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage, sir." "No need to be modest. Please sit down." Jack smiled and pulled out the chair and sat. He did not reveal his discomfort with sitting with his back to the rest of the room, something he seldom did. "Tamara has told me how you rescued her from that awful highwayman today. I am most grateful to you, sir. She is most precious to me. I don't know what I'd do if anything happened to her." Tamara Wilde looked a little chagrined, even with her masking smile. Jack tried not to show his surprise at this sudden change and display of gratitude. "I'm just glad I could be of assistance," Jack said, facing the girl directly. "A girl shouldn't be too careful, you know." "Well, I'm glad you could join us. For you, anything is on the house. Are you staying here?" King asked. "No, I'm staying down the street." "Well, if you'd like, move over to the palace. While you're here, everything's on me." "Thank you," Jack grinned approvingly. "I just might do that." Tamara remained quiet while Jack and Alexander King chit-chatted a bit, getting acquainted. King has insisted that Jack call him Lucky. They had ordered their meals and continued conversation while waiting arrival of the meal. Then the bombshell dropped, and Jack tried to hide his surprise. "Tamara tells me you work for the federal government," King stated. How the hell did she know that? Clayton's brain was spinning, astonished. "Yes," Tamara interjected. "He's a mining inspector." "What?" Jack thought to himself. "What's going on?" He stared at Tamara, searching her face for a clue. Stone cold it was, with a smile, gazing up with her green eyes. "I didn't realize I had talked so much," Jack said, still probing her eyes, with a casual expression on his own face. "Oh, yes," she chided. "I thought I could never get you to shut up." Well, you certainly tried hard enough, he chuckled. She seemed amused. And I must say, he said to King, she was mighty persuasive. She has that affect on me too, King laughed. Then, changing his tone, so, Mr. Clayton, are you here to inspect my mine? Clayton, still looking at Tamara and reading something, yeah, among others. But yes, yours being the biggest mine in these parts, it is at the top of my list. Well, when did you have in mind? King asked. Somehow, there was urgency in Tamara's nonchalance. I would like to get it done as soon as possible. My workload has been piling up somewhat. I have a grand idea, King enthused. How about you come out to my ranch, stay the night, and we can get an early start in the morning? Whoa, slow down. Jack's mind was whirling fast, but he dared not show it. What is going on? This was all too easy. Was he being played? Obviously, the wild woman was playing him, even from the start this afternoon. She probably staged that whole thing. She knew who he was all along. He remembered now she knew about the shoulder holster. Did King know? Probably. What about this mining inspector thing? What was that? If she knew that much about him, she probably knew that he was a lawyer, not an engineer. He'd have to play along. Smells like a trap, though. Sounds like a workable idea, Jack agreed. He glanced at Tamara. Approval was in her eyes, even though invisible. The meal and drinks came. Talk was pleasant. King talked about his ranch and mine holdings and did little to pry into Clayton's business, which led Jack to believe that King probably knew all about him. Dusk was settling outside when they had finished. King said he would have a surrey waiting outside while Jack would get the things he needed from his room to take with him. Jack excused himself and left the restaurant. In the dimly lit corridor of his hotel, Jack stopped outside his room and retrieved his key from his pocket. It was still turning and clicking in the lock when he heard a sound from inside. He drew his pistol from his shoulder harness, stood a little off to the side, and threw the door open. In the gloom, he could see a man's leg extending through the window, stepping into the room. "Hold it, right there," Jack boomed. The man's leg jerked back out of the window. The sash fell back in place. Clayton raced across the room and threw up the sash. The man was not in sight. He must have pulled himself to the roof above. Holstering his gun, the G-man twisted around, shoving himself backwards through the window and reaching up to grasp a handhold on the roof. He pulled himself up, rolled onto the roof, and pushed himself to his feet, drawing his pistol again, moving swiftly but cautiously toward the ridgeline. He could hear the clattering of feet on the other side. By the time Clayton reached the apex of the roof, the sound was gone. He stood silently outlined against the fading sky for a moment, listening. The cool night breeze brushing his face and flapping his coattails. There was a crash of cans and falling debris in the dark alley below. He thought he could make out the dark shadow of a large man disappearing into the darkness below.